Hello, and welcome to the Ask the Industry podcast, episode 35. My name's Simon Caine, and for those of you new to the show, this is the podcast where I interview the most influential people from the worlds of stand-up, comedy, radio, TV, and today, podcasting. Ben Walker founded Fuzz Productions, which produced many award-winning podcasts, including the Sony Award-winning Do the Right Thing, the Loaded Laughter Award-winning Pappy's Flatshare Slamdown, and the Chortle Award-winning Richard Herrings As It Occurs to Me. We got him on to talk about what it takes to make an award-winning podcast, what it takes to win awards as a podcast, how to make money from podcasting, if it's even possible to live off of the money that you make from podcasting, and everything in between. It was a really interesting chat, and I really enjoyed chatting podcasts with anyone, really, but he is so learned and so knowledgeable about it. He's got a lot of experience in the BBC producing radio shows, so we got into comparisons about that and how much effort it takes to put out a radio show versus a podcast and what the pros and cons are there. It's a really useful episode for anyone who wants to start a podcast but isn't sure where to start, how hard it is, what equipment you need, what audiences you can expect to get, all that kind of stuff. So if you know anyone that wants to start a podcast but isn't sure where to start or what they can get out of it, this is probably the best thing to send them, although I am biased on that. If you're enjoying the show, please do remember to subscribe. Also, if you have a minute, if you could rate it in iTunes, that'd be really useful, and we get into that in the episode about how it is useful, but how we're not 100% sure if it is as useful as it could be. So I won't repeat it here. Have a little listen. So without any more delays, this is Ben Walker.
So I got started podcasting in, I think it was 2009. It was whenever Richard Herring started As It Occurs to Me. One of the main cast of that is Dan Tetzel, As It Occurs to Me. And I know Dan of old. We went to the same uni. And I was he was in a sketch group called Club Seals. And I sort of used to help promote them and was sort of vaguely involved with them at university. And anyway, Dan was involved in Richard Herring's show and knew that they needed a producer. And I had recently finished working full-time at the BBC Radio Comedy Department and was freelancing and was looking to take on interesting projects. And so Dan approached me and sort of asked if I wanted to get involved, and I was sort of intrigued at the ethos of it, actually. It was Richard's ethos for that podcast which really got me interested, because he not only set himself a ridiculous challenge of writing a full script every week, but also really wanted it to go out warts and all. He didn't want any editing. He just wanted it recorded well and then sort of bosh out the next day was what he wanted, which was quite refreshing, because my background before that had been in a producer in the BBC Radio Comedy Department, but also a radio editor. I've done an awful lot of editing of radio comedy programs, and so it was fun to be producing a show, or really facilitating a recording of a show in the case of As It Occurs to Me. There was a bit of sort of chatting through the script beforehand, but really I was there just to make sure it was recorded well, and then not having to edit it afterwards was quite refreshing. So I got into podcasts with As It Occurs to Me, and then that sort of went on for a few series, and in the course of that, a few months into that, I was chatting to Pappy's about doing a panel show with them, and also was chatting to Danielle Ward about doing a panel show with her, because she had an idea called Dilemma, which she'd been pitching to Radio 4, which at the time they hadn't decided they were going to go for, and I said, well, if they don't, they're mad, and I'd love to make it as a podcast. And eventually they did, but what I'd realised in the meantime, chatting to Danielle, was actually the idea of what is the right thing to do was a lot bigger than just moral dilemmas. So her Radio 4 show Dilemma is all about moral dilemmas, whereas Do the Right Thing, it's the panel show I devised with her, which I sort of still make, is often what's the right practical thing to do in this situation. We tend to avoid moral dilemmas. So yeah, I sort of got into it that way, and I was getting those two going when I was still freelancing. So I sort of, was in charge of my own time and could put proper time into getting them started, and I suppose at the time I was in a place to edit them fairly quickly afterwards. And yeah, they've been great fun to do. Slightly trickier to do now, insofar as I now work full-time. I have a family now, whereas I had a much smaller family before, so it's harder to fit in the editing time. But we still record them and we still get them out eventually. So, yeah.
Okay, and like I said to you before, this is just me doing everything on this one. And I know most of my friends who do podcasts have either them and a friend who do it, or like you said, just put it out warts and all, and that's basically it.
Yeah.
Do you want to just quickly explain what a producer actually does? So, for example, you were saying before that you didn't have to edit on that one. So, like, what was left to the role with that one? Or is that a producer and editor role? Are they separate things?
Well, I suppose I'd compare it all probably to roles on radio. And so I used to work, as I said, for the BBC Radio Comedy Department, and I used to produce shows for Radio 4 in the main, occasionally Radio 2. I worked on things like The Now Show, The Vote Now Show, a series called Look Away Now, which was a sports sketch show. And on those, the role of producer was to look over the whole thing, get the, get the idea pitched and get the network to buy it, and then get the performers and the writers, and in radio, very much. I mean, you might have a script editor involved in the project, but you'd be very hands-on with the script as well, and you'd arrange the recording and make sure everyone was in place to get it made. And then you'd tend to work with an editor in post-production, and I think that's healthy because you're getting another brain, you're getting someone else who's sort of coming to it fresh and might have a different take from you. However, because I had worked as an editor for the Radio Comedy Department before I became a producer there, I was often, and this is mostly down to my own megalomania, I'd often sort of edit my own shows. And depending on the show, sometimes depending on the show, that was the right thing to do, and sometimes I'd work with another editor, especially on topical shows or something with a quick turnaround. It was you always needed to work with someone else. Anyway, with that background, I think that's why working on Richard Herrings, as it occurs to me, was so refreshing. And it's the same deal, really, with his Leicester Square Theatre podcast, which I also produce, which I also produce. Not all of them, because I can't make all of them, but I produce the first few series of them and still do that occasionally now. That's very much a sort of a record it and put it out ethos. Although, of course, in that one, we will occasionally edit things out if we're asked to by the guest and things like that. But when I was coming up with Flatshare Slamdown and Do the Right Thing, Flatshare Slamdown is the one I make with Pappy's, a panel show. Should I assume people know what these are? Or should I sort of explain what they are?
Well, sorry. So on my it's fine. On every podcast, I have show notes, so they can link to everything. But if you want to explain what they are, that's fine. They'll all be linked to in the show notes, which will be at simoncaine.co.uk. Shameless plug. Carry on.
No, fine. Well, just very briefly, Pappy's are a great three-man sketch group. I'd known them for a while. I had an idea that they would be great in a panel show setup with Matthew in charge and Ben and Tom being sort of warring team captains, and met them. We discussed a few ideas, and Flatshare Slamdown came out of that. And the premise is that Matthew, Ben and Tom share a flat. Matthew's the landlord. Every episode they get into a squabble over some chore: who's going to answer the door, who's going to clean the cooker, who's going to change the recycling bin, whatever it is. And that is the premise for the show. So every show we come up with a different themed round, sort of tenuously linked to the theme of the week. Then we have a round called Flat Games, which is different every time, where we often just work out a pun based on an existing game and a way of sort of bastardizing that game and making it our own. And then we have some regular rounds, Beef Brothers and Quickfire Round. That's that one. Do the Right Thing is a panel show where two teams of comedians try and work out the right thing to do. It's a very chatty show. It's all sort of everything we prepare for that is about spurring on the conversation. I told you I'd waffle. I'm waffling now. Anyway, to sort of tie up all of what I've been saying, when I came to having worked on Richard Herrings, as it occurs to me, and it wasn't edited, I was sort of thinking, this is great, but I've got these panel show ideas, which it'll be really good to make them not as radio shows. They were never really devised with radio in mind at all. They were always devised as this would be a great podcast. And I thought, well, I'm someone who edits all the time. I edit radio shows all the time. That would be a good skill to bring to these podcasts, and it would mean that I can sort of record loads of great stuff. And every show's different, but these shows were made to be edited in different ways, actually, because Flatshare Slamdown, literally with Flatshare Slamdown, I'll go through the rushes and I will just cut out the bits that don't work as well, and there isn't, it's all, I mean, the gigs are huge fun, but there'll always be bits which are sort of in the moment maybe, or refer to something before the gig, or are quite visual and don't necessarily come across. So with Flatshare Slamdown, we'll normally record between 75 and 90 minutes, and I'll inevitably cut it back to about 45 minutes. But that's really natural wastage. I'm not looking to cut it down to that size. And, that's cutting out gaps, half of that, really. And then Do the Right Thing, the model with that is to really try and get it down towards half an hour. I'm not strict. I don't have to hit 30 minutes bang on, but I'm trying with that to get it. And I'll get it down usually around 35 minutes. But the role of, to go back to the question, which was years ago, the role of producer in both of those is I'm involved with Flatshare Slamdown. I meet with Pappy's ahead of the recordings, and we work out what our themes are going to be, work out some ideas for the games, talk about who we want to get on as guests. Closer to the recording, me and Matthew will work on the script together. Matthew will do the bulk of the work, or certainly most of the funny work. Some of the lamer gag questions in the quickfire round might occasionally be mine, but we'll confer on the script, and obviously I'll sort out, and I'll market the gig. I'll sort out getting the word out there. And then Do the Right Thing, I will do an awful lot of research, really, with that. Conferring with Danielle, I'll sort of pull out, here, we haven't done scenarios like these, we could look at these. I'll find a sort of a short list of agony aunt problems for our second round, which is agony. It's usually me who'll find... It'll often be me finding and talking to the expert guests for the Ask the Expert round in Do the Right Thing. But all conferring closely with Danielle, and she again will then. I'll sort of arrange the script with the. I don't know. We did one the other day where the scenario was how to avoid a wolf attack. So I will have researched the answers in that case, and then I'll have left Danielle a note saying, so we need the scenario to be how to avoid a wolf attack, and it needs to be set here. It can't be. It needs to be set in a wilderness, or they need to have a backpack. Yeah. I'll sort of put those sort of parameters in there, and then she'll make it funny.
It's sort of more obvious when you've heard the show a couple of times.
Yes, I think so. And then at the moment, yes, I do all the editing afterwards, and that can take some time. And it's where I used to be able to take a day to do it. It's now sort of fitted in over various evenings when my wife goes to bed. So actually, just at the moment, I'm looking to see how I can delegate some of those tasks a bit more, actually, as it happens. But that's changing now.
See, that's one of the most interesting things you said there was when you said you were trying to get the show to half an hour.
Yeah.
For me, the plus point of a podcast is it can be any length. And I know a lot of... So I think I talked to Stuart Goldsmith about how he tries to keep them to an hour, for example. So he has like some sort of consistency. Yeah. And I think Richard Herring does the same thing where the Leicester, they are within an hour, right? But
No. Herring will just go on. Herring, there'll be an hour if... He records 2 a night. The first one will tend to be an hour because we'll know we have to have an interval and get the second guest on. But they have run for an hour and 45 sometimes. So no, certainly Richard isn't adhering to any strict time limit. But the reason is, we Do the Right Thing, I just thought it suited it better. It's a more traditional... Look, first of all, with a radio show, you edit it... a half-hour radio show on Radio 4 is 28 minutes long. And I might be slightly out of date, but what that meant was when I edited the shows, they had to last between 27:45 and 27:50. 55, I think, at the time. You know, you had a window of 10 seconds and your show had to be that length. I'm not doing that with Do the Right Thing. I'm not, you know, if I'm under 40 minutes, I'll tend to be happy. But genuinely, it suits the show. I mean, first of all, they naturally slice down to roughly that length. But, you know, I listen to the long edit, say, at where it's 42 minutes long, and you'll listen to it, and you'll know that there's 4 minutes dotted here and there that isn't as strong or feels like it's slightly lower paced or lower intensity than what's around it, and it just feels, you know, I think this will be better if I nip that out. I mean, and that's my decision, and that's what I bring to it, if you know what I mean. But it is. There was a call a while, you know, and an entirely valid call a while ago of, Ben, these are taking absolutely ages to get out there. Could you not just release the rushes and put them out? But they would be. They're less. The model of the show is for it to be an edited show. That is what the model is, and it works like that. And personally, I don't think it would work as well letting it all hang out, in a sense. I mean, I'm participating in one now, but you edit these, right? I think in the wrong hands, a show like As It Occurs to Me or Richard Herring's Leicester Square Theatre podcast, and I dare say there's plenty of people out there who, you know, for whom it isn't their taste. But I think Richard's particularly skilled at what he did with both those podcasts, and you know, there are podcasts I've listened to in the past where people haven't necessarily known, you know, where they've released podcasts unedited and they haven't had the awareness to sort of be editing as they go along mentally before they speak. Do you know what I mean? They just, I mean, I'm well aware there'll be people out there saying, but some of these podcasts ramble on and on. But, you know, that's just the model to Do the Right Thing, and it suits it, I think.
No, that's cool. No, the only reason I was asking is because, like you said, it's your BBC background that kind of gives you that, trying to keep it to a rough estimation of time. But for I mean, I know some people, they don't edit their podcasts and they put them out and they could be 2 hours long. And
yeah,
I've had, I mean, when I first started, I think my first podcast was just under 3 hours long, and I edited that down, believe it or not. And I think if I was going to go back and do it again, I would probably have not spent as long a time with that guest, and then would have or put it in 2 parts.
Yeah.
But it's one of those learning curves.
Yeah.
But I suppose the advantage of the internet for me is that there is no, you know, it's them slotting it into their lives rather than sitting down and watching a half-hour program.
Yes. Well, you know what? I think that's true, and this isn't the reason I do it at all. But I would say that a half-hour show or a 40-minute show is. I tend to, when I'm sort of working on the audio side of it, if you like the way I sort of mix it and compress it and master it, for want of a better word, I'm very much thinking of someone sitting on a train or a bus, in the sense that I compress the audio in them quite a lot, so that even when people are speaking quietly, it's right in people's ears, hopefully not to an ear bleeding level, and please do tweet me if that's the case. But I'm very much trying to think in those terms, and I think really I'm hoping, not hoping, but I hope these podcasts are suitable for people to listen to on their commute and things like that. And I suppose a half-hour, 40-minute show is possibly something they're more likely to be able to sort of swallow in one go, if you know what I mean. But,
okay, yeah, I see.
But even that, that's sort of back engineering slightly, yeah. And it wasn't because I came from a BBC Radio background that I thought shows must be this length. But I was at the time doing a lot of editing, so I was a quick editor, and I sort of had a lot of the editing I did was panel shows. I edited the news quiz for a long, long time, so I sort of had a good feel, I think, for editing conversational shows. I mean, the only editing I do now is the podcasts, but so I sort of had that, and I really enjoyed doing As It Occurs to Me, where there was no editing. But that was, but first of all, that was me working on Richard's show, and I had some ideas with other people for my own shows to originate myself. Right. And I just thought, well, what's the right model for this? And I thought, I mean, goodness knows, if you've been to any TV recordings of panel shows, you'll know they can last for hours, and it's not necessarily a jolly sort of 2-hour recording. So, and that's not the case with Do the Right Thing, because it's very good fun, and there's none of the, you know, people can speak freely when they're recording Do the Right Thing, and there's no commissioners there to impress or anything like that. It's just we're fun people. We know we can have a fun chat, and let's see how that goes. But they just naturally fall to that side. I mean, I seem to remember. In fact, I was looking through some old scripts the other day. I seem to remember that our second round is called Agony, and it starts with we find a genuine agony aunt column from some newspaper or magazine around the world. And the first part of the round is we read that problem out. This is usually a funny problem in some way. It's got some amazing funny detail in it. And the panel have to try and work out... Well, they A, have to say what the right advice is, and B, they're supposedly trying to work out what advice the agony aunt gave. And that's how the round starts. And then we do some agony... Then we agony aunt some problems from the audience on the night. But we originally did 2 of those every time, and we have an Ask the Expert round where we get an expert on, somebody who works in an interesting field. You know, we have a John Ronson on psychopaths, and we've had I should be doing more selling of these podcasts, shouldn't I? We've had bomb disposal experts, we've had policemen, we've had the curator of flies at the Natural History Museum. We've had all sorts of genuine expert guests or people doing interesting jobs on. And the aim of that round is the panel have to try and get to know them and then second guess what they would do in some heightened scenarios based on their area of work. And apparently we used to do 3 of them, but now we only do 2. So even on the nights, the shows have slimmed down in terms of, I think we quickly realised that actually, as long as we pick the right topics, we're throwing up subjects for conversation, and funny people are very good at maintaining funny conversations. Yeah. And so it slimmed down from that. We didn't need any more than that on the night. And then that's just, it naturally edits down to there. And then I will set myself the task of trying to get it down to around 30, 35 minutes, just because I think it makes for a stronger show. Yeah.
I get what you mean about that, because after a few episodes of mine, I started getting emails from comedians, saying they love it, but they're listening to it in the car, or they're listening to it on the commute. So no, not on the commute. So they're listening to it on the car or at their desk at work.
Yeah.
And they wanted the volume higher, or I think at the time, my first 3 or 4 episodes, I hadn't mixed it well. So the left mic was coming out the left side, and the right mic was coming out the right side, just because I hadn't...
Like the Beatles.
Yes, like the Beatles, but not anywhere near as probably... well received. Yeah. But of course, I was learning, and I'd never mixed anything before, and now I thankfully have Adobe Audition I use for that, and it's really good for getting that out. Yeah. I was going to ask, because consistency is really important. I mean, Richard Herring's podcasts have those sort of pullback questions, and not pullback questions. Have emergency questions and taglines and things to get people involved, and people sort of half expect some stuff in it. And so I was wondering if, tips-wise from you, would you say having a consistency in length and a consistency in format help with getting more audience, or with developing the audience?
That's a good question. I think I personally prefer, and I think something that, as it occurs to me, didn't do, I think as it occurs to me, you really had to get on board with the first episode and listen through, because the recurring jokes in that, I mean, it was very, very funny if you knew where you were, but there was a lot of sort of referencing what had happened before, and sure, you could join in later on, but do you know what I mean? It was there was a bit of a barrier to get past to get into the world, whereas as you say, in RHLSTP, there are emergency questions, but they stand each time. So back in the first series, he used to ask every comedian, or every male comedian, if they'd ever tried to suck their own cock, as a recurring question. Sorry, Mum, if you're listening to this. And she won't be. I mean, she might be. I mean, I don't know. She doesn't.
She's a really big listener.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. And that's fine, because you can, if you're only listening, if you only ever tune into the Stephen Fry episode, then that question makes sense in and of itself. And I think there are recurring factors in Do the Right Thing and Pappy's Flatshare Slamdown, but I think every episode can sort of stand and fall on its own, if you know what I mean. So I was in Do the Right Thing. There are certain things we not deliberately play on, but will come up. So Michael Legg, who's one of the regular team captains, is vegan, and very effusively so. And Margaret Campbell-Smith, who's the other team captain, is Catholic, and it's not like we target those things, but they will often come up. And what I did find at one point was that we started talking about, I don't know, I can't think of an example, but the fact that Michael, there'd be something we were talking about, and Michael would come in and make a joke from a sort of a vegan standpoint. That's the wrong way to say it. But the fact that Michael was vegan, the conversation would turn that way without having said Michael's a vegan, or without Michael saying I'm a vegan or anything like that. And I was quite keen just to make sure that going forward we always made sure the audience were up to speed with that. So I think I recorded Danielle saying, Michael, you're a vegan, so that I always had that in the back pocket. And I sort of had a word with them, and we... Do you know what I mean? So that we're not... So that people who repeat listeners know it and know them, but that anyone tuning in for the first time can immediately be up to speed. And in Pappy, Flatshare, Slamdown, I mean, the recurring factors are all in the amazing sort of performances and the relationship of Pappies with one another, and that sort of sparring and the way they feed off one another. And I think that stands alone. I mean, if you've listened from the start, you'll know that bad puns and there's a joke now. Each episode starts with a sketch. I mean, all these podcasts I make are recorded in front of an audience, but Flatshare, Slamdown, the podcast starts with a sketch which we record. Which Ben from Pappy's records in his home studio, and the sketch is really there just to set up the theme of the episode, so recycling or cleaning the cooker or whatever it is. And we used to record these and play these out live to the audience. And because you've got an audience there who are there for a live gig and they've just seen Pappy's warm up the room in a very live manner, suddenly playing in a minute and a half of pre-recorded sketch, everyone sort of sat and politely listened, and I'm sure enjoyed it, but sort of chuckled inwardly or smiled. And so it's quickly become this thing of the sketch that we start each show with a terrible sketch no one likes. So at our live gigs now, that's what they'll say, and they just say the theme this week is this, and we just go straight into the show, and then we bolt the sketch on afterwards. So regular listeners will know that there's this sketch, and then we go into a live show. I suppose new listeners might come to that and go, "Oh, I thought this was a live show," for the first 2 minutes, and then we get into it. But it's that. I think they're all pretty accessible shows. The way they're listed on iTunes, but certainly on the British Comedy Guide, which hosts them, it's always the most recent episode first. And I think people should just be able to go in and listen to the top episode and work their way down, rather than have to think they start at the beginning. Yeah, I mean, for me, I try and make every episode as evergreen as possible. But I also, so for example, I'll ask this question now, but I was going to wait till later, because it was a question a while ago. I never can remember the number of the episode, but I always say something like, so about 6 months ago, I interviewed David Quantick about TV and radio, and he was talking about how radio is a lot quicker to produce because there's obviously less of it to deal with, and there's more easy to edit. But also, when you do podcasts, it means that because you've got no barrier to distribution, you can just put it straight out. And I was going to ask what you think that impact's going to have on the future of, for example, mainstream TV and traditional radio, because at the moment, we could sit down here, we could write out a sketch and put it up straight onto a podcast host and get it out there immediately. Whereas, like you said, was it Danielle? She had to go to the BBC4 people. With Dilemma. Well, yes. I mean, there's in TV and radio. I mean, I work in TV development is my day job. I mean, and yes, there's a very strong, stringent commissioning process for TV and radio, because any channel or any broadcaster wants to make sure ideas fit their brief and are right for the channel and things like that. And that certainly has meant, in the heat of the moment, there have been ideas I've thought these are brilliant ideas, and the channel haven't bought them, and I've thought, well, that is, I can't really, how do I explain that to the writer who brought that to me, or because I can't, I don't agree with that decision. But then, you begin to appreciate the other side of the sheer weight of things they've got to choose between, and also, you see how they sort of pigeonhole things being like each other when they're not, and although you don't agree with that, you can understand how they get to that process. And it certainly is true that online you can just put something out yourself. The the gaping difference between the two is that you get paid for one and you don't necessarily get paid for the other. And so, yes, I don't know. I think it's really exciting in terms of content, because I think it means that there's loads of stuff out there to choose from, especially podcasting versus radio. I mean, I love radio, and there's some brilliant radio made, but podcasting has really freed up people just to get some ideas down. I mean, there are certain radio shows which would be an awful lot of work to make as a podcast, but then people are doing that. So, I think it's really, a panel show's not simple. It's not two people chatting to one another. But I was lucky enough to sort of have all the kit or have most of the kit, and also be an editor at the time. So, I don't know. I think it's really exciting in terms of content. I am less clear exactly how it's going to go in terms of building careers, in terms of the online product itself making money. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, but it's such a there's so many people doing it, and there's so much good stuff being made, and there are so many young people especially who are choosing to consume TV and radio through their computers or phones as opposed to through the TV or the radio, that I think it's not going to go away, and it's really exciting to see where it goes. I couldn't make a career out of making podcasts, if you know what I mean. That's a weird thing to say. You might want to strike that. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. But
no, I know what you mean. It's I've just finished writing a book called How to Make a Living by Working for Free, and it's all about building audiences using free content, but it's not making your living from the free content. It's trying to get people interested in what you are and what you do, and then...
No, it's interesting you say that, because actually, of course, if a comedian's running their own podcast, then I can totally see it. I mean, it can be a really useful way to build an audience who will then come and see your shows when you tour, who will buy your online specials or whatever it is you're doing. You're building an audience. In my case, I don't really have anything to sell in that sense. I'm not a stand-up comedian. You can probably tell I'm not very funny. I'm going to make myself laugh. And
that's what most comedians do, to be
fair. I got into it genuinely because I was excited to work with the people I was working with, really liked the ideas, and really wanted to make stuff. To be honest, that sounds a bit sort of childish, but that's genuinely it. I thought these were great ideas. I thought I could do a good job of making them, and I really enjoy the craft of making a program. I really do. And yes, so that's why I got into it. And the logic for someone like Richard Herring is he's built up this big online community around all these things he gives away for free. And from what I understand, that means a lot more people go and see his tour shows, and a lot of people buy his DVDs and books, and he can make a living from that, if you see what I mean. And I totally buy into that. I can't sit down and look too hard at why I'm continuing to do this, because I don't have that. There isn't that justification for it. It's purely I'm making stuff I really believe in and think's good, and I'm so grateful has found an audience who seem to really like it. And so that's why I do it. And also, I suppose, in reference to your last question, I'm genuinely excited to see what happens to online content and whether someone can work out a way of making it pay for itself in a way, and then hopefully I'll be well placed to get involved at that point. But I haven't got a solution to that myself.
Well, yeah, I mean, I interviewed Richard for the book, and he told me that he gives away something like 60 or 70% of his work now, and makes more money than he's ever made, which to me, so I started writing the book 2 years ago, and I've done the podcast for just over a year, and when I found out that he has done it that way around, I was like, oh, makes sense. You need to, and also this was around the time, so I don't know if you're aware of, do you know Patreon, the website?
Oh, yes, I am, and Yes, I am interested in Patreon, the website. It's a very interesting one, because in terms of funding models, well, hang on, you finish your point, and if you're going to ask me about funding, then I'll answer.
Yeah. Well, I might as well now. The thing is, for me, I think so. Like you said, in traditional models, you get the show commissioned by a certain person, they then make it and you get paid, and obviously that's a rough guide for it, but that's the way that works. With independently produced stuff, you put it up, you try and build an audience for it, and then you ask that audience to support you, and if they like it enough, they hopefully do, and if they don't like, or even if they like it enough and they can't support you that way, they support you, like you said, other ways. Patreon, I think online content is going back to the arts patronage. I think instead of it being though one person like a king who like commissions a painting or whatever, it's crowdsourcing patronage that's going to be the way forward. And I did want to get your opinion on the badge system Richard Herring's got, the whole I paid £1 badges, and when you think it's a good idea to actually even start asking for financial compensation for, like, whether it's a certain number of episodes or whether it's a certain core audience or whether it's a certain size of audience.
Well, okay, I'm not really a part of how Richard chooses to fund his podcasts, if you see what I mean, but I can give you a sort of a potted understanding as far as I know, which Richard might well refute further down the line, but Richard was always doing live. Well, I mean, he does plenty of podcasts that aren't live, but the ones I've been involved with have always been at the Leicester Square Theatre. They've always sold pretty well, and so there was money coming in from ticket sales, nothing like a radio show budget or anything like that, but some money. And then Chris from Go Faster Stripe got involved. He's a good person to chat.
I'm getting him on.
Yeah.
I spoke to him yesterday.
So then Chris from Go Faster Stripe got involved. He's known Richard for a long time, and they decided to start filming them. And I think, if memory serves, that's when the I paid £1 badges were brought into play. Mm-hmm. Because filming them cost. So as well as so how did they do it to start with? So obviously the money on the night on the door was some money coming in, but as soon as they were filming them, they were initially charging for the videos, I think that's right, and doing the badges. So they were getting the videos made and then charging people to access them through the Go Faster Stripe website, I think. And then they also had these I paid £1 badges, which I think worked okay, but then they decided to go the Kickstarter. I probably missed out some stages here, but then they decided to go the Kickstarter model for the most recent 2 series, which has worked very well, I think. Yep. So that's interesting. So in terms of funding my own podcasts, though, because I haven't done any, we've never done a donate button. We've never done a Kickstarter.
You mean for Do the Right Thing?
Do the Right Thing or Pappy Flatshare Slamdown.
Right.
We charge money on the nights for people to come along and see them, like any gig. I don't know if this still happens, I think they occasionally appear on British Airways. In fact, if somebody could tell me, I'd be very interested. I think they appear on British Airways international flights under their Best of British banner, where they have a load of comedy podcasts. And I think they have sort of truncated episodes of Do the Right Thing and Pappy Flatshare Slamdown on there, for which we got sort of a nominal fee.
Yeah, they do the same for Comedian podcasts.
Yeah. We just get a nominal fee for that, a one-off. And that's all the money coming in. Now, the reason I never did a donate button is neither of these are weekly shows. And any regular listeners will tell you that, if 4 or 5 come out in a year, then we're doing well. It's really since I've been working full time and I've now got more children. It's just the time to edit them primarily is what holds things up.
So would you say a tip is don't have children if you want to be good at podcasting?
No, but just have an understanding partner and don't need as much sleep as other people. What could be a thing? I don't know. It's definitely tricky, which is why I'm looking to try and devolve. Is that the word? Delegate. That's the word. Some of the bits and bobs. But again, I'm such a megalomaniac. I mean, editing's the killer. I really want to find someone who can work with me on the editing, but I'm such a megalomaniac. It's quite tricky.
I know that.
So we'll see. I'd sort of need someone who I knew was going to make exactly the same decisions as me, and then it'd be fine. Anyway, I'm working towards that system because that will speed things up. And actually, we're changing things as of next year. I don't know when this is going out, but 2016, the plan is Flatshare Slamdown is going to come out every month on the first of the month.
Exclusive now?
Exclusive. We got a Christmas special coming out. We're recording Christmas specials of both at the start of December, which I'm going to get out before Christmas, he said, foolishly. And then Flatshare Slamdown is going to come out monthly next year and Do the Right Thing. Hopefully we'll get the series out in the spring of the present ones. But it's but that's the lag, is the editing. But anyway, sorry, I'm digressing again. But in terms of... So I never thought the donate button was fair, because shows like, I think Answer Me This have one, I might be wrong, I think the Bugle had one, certainly. But they were regular weekly shows coming out every week, and you knew you were donating money, you'd immediately get a tangible sort of, oh yes, the show is going out. So then Kickstarter was a model that was popular at the time, and I didn't think that was quite right. That's sort of because I think with panel shows, this is my feeling on it anyway, other people might disagree, but I think everyone needs to know where they stand in terms of being paid. And I think, I looked at it, and, you start going through a process of, well, if you pay this person the right amount, then you've got to pay this person the right amount. And you want it to be fair across the board. And very quickly, you're getting up towards a radio budget.
Right.
And, a half hour on Radio 4 is over 11 grand. And so, I mean, it's not quite that high, but you're getting into the thousands. Because if if you want to pay people properly. The other way to do it is for everyone to know where they stand, in that no one's really getting anything for it. So I've never taken... myself, or any of the regulars have never been paid for either of those podcasts. We've never taken a payment for it. We all have lots of drinks on the night, and that sort of thing, but we've never taken any payment for it. And our guests, don't do it for the money, if you know what I mean. We don't really pay people properly at all. But I'm always very upfront about that, and I explain the situation and say it's good fun, and we reach a lot of listeners, and it would be a good thing to do. And thankfully, everyone's always been very accommodating about that, because I know how in slightly different circumstances being asked to do stuff for free is very annoying in this world. But anyway, that's sort of where they are. And I sort of think the middle ground between those two is slightly dodgy territory, because the middle ground between those two is that you're saying we're going to pay you for this, but we're not going to pay you enough, or we're going to be paying a strange sort of halfway house amount. Yeah. I'm possibly not explaining that very well, but suddenly it's not just, if you're going to pay the guests properly, then it's unfair not to be paying everyone on the panel the same amount. If you're doing that, then I want to be paid, because do you know what I mean? But also I'm producing it, but then the editing takes an age, and and so it's...
How do you work it out, like per hour or per pull factor by the comedian, because they might have their audience that bring people down on the night? Or,
I mean, like all kinds you'd always have to keep it sort of straight down the line, and everyone gets paid the same. But even so, it's so yes. When I thought about Kickstarter, I was thinking, well, actually, we'd have to ask for quite a lot for a series. And I'm not sure, and everyone would be asking, the fans of the show will be saying, well, hang on, you've done this for nothing up to now, and fine, we'd be happy to donate you some cash, but goodness me, this is a lot. And do you know what I mean? But Patreon's an interesting one, because that can work by, you could say this much per month, but you can also say this much per episode, and things like that. And that seems that there might be something there we could look at, because... at least with that, even if you're not getting Patreoned up to the amount you need to pay everyone properly, at least then you can sort of do a bit more long-term planning on it.
I have the same issue with this one. So I have a Patreon, and I think it gets about $46 at the moment per episode, which is enough for like my travel here, for example, and like it doesn't cover it, basically. Like, if you were to even put it as minimum wage, you're not covering anything. But I get enough out of it that I enjoy what I'm doing, and it gives me sort of a small budget to know what I'm doing future kind of thing. And it sort of makes me feel a little bit like there's definitely going to be, I think it's 13 patrons, 13 people downloading it. Because if they've paid for it, they're more likely to listen to it.
Of course.
Which I know sounds ridiculous, but you think, at least 13 people are going to really enjoy this. And so that kind of keeps me going when I'm late into the night editing, like you do. For me, I mean, a few people have said to do it per month, but like, what if, for example, I can't get anything out in a month because I have a family crisis or something happens?
Yeah.
I do it per episode. And for me, that model works the best, because that way I feel like I'm working towards a payment for a thing that I'm doing. But I know what you mean. For me, I feel awkward. I feel less awkward asking for money since I've started doing more festivals, because I do 3 festivals, and I'm used to now at the end of the show saying, I've provided you with an hour worth of entertainment in the form of my show.
Yeah.
If you've enjoyed it, please pay. Because I can't eat otherwise. Like, that's literally the functionality. But I can imagine if you don't do, because you're not a comedian, you don't really ask for money in any other way other than your job.
No.
So I can imagine that for you, that's even more awkward.
Because we get plenty of people coming to the gigs, so we do get money coming into the gigs, which exceeds what we pay in the gigs, but it's still, you never know what that's going to be, and it's still not a significant amount of cash in terms of the number of people involved. So we have these little sort of pots growing, which we, with Pappy's, we shot a video. There was one of their jingles, I Wikipedia'd Windows, which was always stuck in our heads, and we created a music video for that, which was great fun. Just small budget, just creating more online content. And, I'd love to try and work out a way of filming them in a way that mirrors what I hope the podcast is, that it's lo-fi but done well. So it's recorded in a much more lo-fi way than a radio show, but it sounds good, you can listen to it, and the show's got good content in it. I keep thinking I really must get around to that. I'd love to try and find a way to film them, but without having to have a massive room, and without having to get in all sorts of different lights, and without having massive cameras even. But I need to pick someone's brains about that at another point. But to get something that, because they're panel shows and everyone's static, a number of cameras, but small enough. This is a pipe dream. But in a way that we can then edit and cut between the cameras and things like that. So, that's what that would be a fun thing to do. And even if it's just one episode of each we did like that, I think that would be valuable, not least because I think YouTube's a lot more shareable than SoundCloud is. It just tends to be that people will share a YouTube link and people will click on it and go, yeah, you share a podcast. And I think people have to be of a mindset to sort of really want to listen to a podcast. Do you know what I mean? It's like you have to go through some more steps.
Yeah, it brings me on quite neatly to another question that's going on. If you, in my Facebook group, we were actually discussing whether I should be putting these out as YouTube videos, but with just an image of the podcast, like the what's it called, avatar of the podcast, because I don't record, obviously you're here now, I don't video record them because most of my guests don't want to be video recorded, let alone audio recorded half the time. So I thought it would be a great idea because, like you said, it's more shareable, it's more discoverable, and YouTube is a search engine. People don't think of it like that, but it is totally a search engine. Yeah. Same as iTunes, but you don't think of it like that. So, I mean, you're saying, have you had better luck then with sort of getting more discoverability from YouTube?
No, I don't think so. We've got a few visual things on YouTube, but they've never been the main focus. And so, no, we get fine numbers as podcasts, which far exceed the hits our YouTube videos have had. But it's more, I sort of think, this might not work because it would be too long compared to, people share 3-minute YouTube videos or minute-long YouTube videos. So it's possibly just vanity, but I think it'd be fun to film them anyway, just so we have a record as we grow old and wrinkly of what we looked like when we were doing these shows, as well as what we sounded like. I think that would be fun. I mean, we're very driven by fun making these shows, and make no bones about that. Anyway, but I also think that I do think, based on absolutely no evidence, that there is a sort of finite audience of podcast listeners in the UK. Sure, it grows slowly, and things like Serial would have brought some new people to podcasting. But I sort of think people who listen to BBC radio podcasts, only those. I don't really count them, if you know what I mean. I mean sort of people delving into independent podcasting. I think it's a slightly finite audience because I think, you have to ask people to do quite a lot to get to podcasting in a way. And so, I think, you've got to, I've got to open iTunes. I've got to go to the store. I've got to look for podcasts. I've got to, you know what I mean? I mean, I know it is simple, but also it's tricky.
It's also a black hole, because like the minute you open it up, you're just thrown loads of icons. And you're like, I'll click that one. Oh, but people have said this one's not as good as that one. Or like this one's got 20 more reviews than that one. I know what you mean by that.
It's just, I think it's why back in the dawn of broadcasting time, they made schedules and put things in order so that you would find things. And anyway, I just think that YouTube is more shareable. I have no idea if the videos we've made on YouTube have brought any new people to the podcast. I suspect actually they've just been there for people who know the podcast to go, oh yeah, this is fun. But I still think actually being able to sort of film the shows, this will probably never happen, but I think it would be a fun thing to do, really primarily so we have a visual record of what the shows are like and were like. But I think that would be of interest to some people on you. That would be of interest to some to people who know the shows, and YouTube would probably be the place to share that with them. But I think potentially, okay, you take some 2-minute clips out the shows and sort of share them around. You never know. Goodness knows. I've made a few videos for online, and one of them got 250,000 hits. Not for these podcasts, quite quickly. Other ones have taken a long time and have got some, and other ones which are great have never got over a couple of hundred. It's I think it's quite hard to predict. In fact, one thing I'd say across not just my YouTube video activity, but also the podcast is, I sort of, as you probably understand, I sort of take an awful lot of the work around the sides on with these. And probably the one area where I feel I'm lacking most is in promoting the podcasts. Really, I think I'd love to try and work out the best way to get it to the places where people who don't know already might go, oh yeah, this is something that would be interesting. But it's the one thing, I take it on and I'll get reviews here and there and all this sort of thing. And again, some of that money in that pot, maybe we should use to put towards promotion of these things a bit more. But yeah, that's the one area of my jack of all trades, which is probably a trade I should give up.
No, I think I know at least 5 podcasts I can think of that I've spoken to in preparation for this interview who have the same problem. We're all looking at ways to try and get more listeners.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the submitted questions, which I want to edit, but I'm going to tell you the exact question that was asked, was realistically what audience size should people expect? And I kind of want to edit that to like, how do you manage your expectations on people listening to it? Because obviously it'll depend on the content, it'll depend on the type of show, it'll depend on who's on it. Do you know, it'll all change. I mean, when I spoke to Richard Herring, he said that, I can't remember which, he wouldn't tell me which episode it was, but he told me one of them had hit over 100,000, and he said it wasn't the Stephen Fry episode or something like that. And I was like, okay, because obviously that was the big one that like got a reveal in it that got loads of press.
I'm sure that must have got over 100,000 now, but
yes.
Well, the figures are notoriously unreliable and with podcasts, because how can anyone know if somebody's listened through to something?
Yes.
The figures I am given, or I find out, I sort of round up or down. For Do the Right Thing and Pappy, Flatshare, Slamdown to about 40,000 is the number I'm told. But again, I don't know how many of those people actually listen to the whole thing or not. The model back in the day, before I understood Twitter, was that we get comedian guests on each time and they'll tweet about the show and then loads of people will find the show. And of course, in reality, I mean, all the comedians we have on are lovely and incredibly supportive. But we're lucky if they tweet about the show a couple of times and those vanish down people's timelines very quickly.
Yeah, Twitter isn't the place for that, really.
Yeah, well, no, quite. I mean, we do a bit of other stuff, but that was before I understood Twitter. I think that was before I had my own Twitter account and sort of went, oh, no, oh well. I think we got up to around 40,000 fairly quickly, and we've sort of maintained. But I don't even know if that's I keep that figure in my head because I like to cling to that and think, it's great we're making these things. It's going out to these number of people. I suppose we do them live, and I've definitely seen our live audiences grow and tickets sell quickly, and we're able to sort of fill out our live shows with not a huge amount of promotion, really, like tweeting, Facebook. Time Out are always incredibly supportive. Chortle will always list us. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not much more than that, and we tend to do quite well. So that's a good sign, I hope.
Yeah. And
people who come along tend to know the podcast, and so you get a good sort of feedback from that. But realistically, I don't know. I mean, look, all the shows I work on, so Pappy's already had a following, so that will have found us some listeners initially. And even if our guests aren't tweeting about the show every time, the fact we have a succession of guests on, we've had some great people on, sort of has added to a sort of cumulative sense of momentum there. Do the Right Thing, actually, funnily enough, obviously there was obviously Michael, Margaret, Danielle all had their own followings, but that was less focused than just saying it's Pappy's show. But that got up to the same levels, and we have the same guests and things there. And I think sometimes the expert guests really catch the imagination with that.
Yeah.
So, and I should say, they both are hosted on the British Comedy Guide, and Mark there is always incredibly supportive with these, and will nudge and promote them, I believe, in the podcast, especially in the newsletters and through Twitter. So, but yeah, I get given these numbers, and you sort of go, oh, good. But it's always, especially with these series, because they take, especially with Pappy, Flatshare, Slamdown, and Do the Right Thing, because there can be absolutely ages between the series coming out. I mean, I think the last series of Do the Right Thing I put out in July to August this year, 2015. The one before that was January to February 2014. So almost 18 months between them. So I put it out going, well, I put it out in the lead up to the Edinburgh Festival, which is never a great time to get comedy PR. But it seems to have, people seem to have noticed and recognised it there. I suppose the people who engage with it on Twitter and keep talking about it, I suppose that's probably only tens of people, if you know what I mean. But it feels like there's a little community there.
Yeah, I think so. To get nerdy for a minute, average figures.
Yeah.
So if I was to pick 10 people on the street, and I was to try and work out their average height, it would be around the middle.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But if you took the average height of 6 billion people, like everyone in the world, you would not get the middle figure. It wouldn't quite work out that way because there's too many variables involved.
Okay.
So, well, that's.
I'm not sure that's mathematically true.
No. But if you extrapolate it out into, okay, let me explain it differently because I'm going to edit that out now. Make me sound like an idiot. No. Well, no, because what I'm trying to say is online there are too many variables for you to work out what's actually, especially for something independently produced, for you to work out what is the best method of doing and how it gets discovered, because everyone's discovering it in a different way.
Yeah.
So as a result, if you took 10 people and you said, how did you discover the podcast, and 8 of them said iTunes, you'd think iTunes is the best method. But if you took all 40,000 of those people and you said, what were the methods that you discovered the thing, it would probably split out slightly differently, which would mean that you would never quite know the best way of promoting it, because you might have then saturated your entire audience on people that are going to ever find it on iTunes.
Yep.
And so the 5% of people that found it through Chortle, for example, are going to be, the people you should target. But you'll think, well, most people find it from iTunes, so I'll plug it on iTunes more.
Yeah, it's tricky, because I think the places that will plug this, Chortle have, I think Daniel and Michael have done their sort of perfect playlists and things in support of the series. British Comedy Guide. I think actually the people who read those are probably the people who are into podcasts already. If you know what I mean, I think that's sort of playing to a home crowd of people who are potentially already not necessarily well disposed to listen to these podcasts, but
podcast savvy.
Yes, and British comedy at this level savvy. So yeah, how do you bubble beyond that? I don't know. iTunes have also been quite supportive. They'll always give us a little, they've featured us a few times and had us on their banners and things, which is always really helpful, I think. I have no idea what effect it has.
That's
but,
the thing. So I got featured in iTunes New and Noteworthy for a couple of months when I first started, and then they put me on like a banner thing a while ago, and my downloads didn't change. And I've spoken to, I won't say who it is because they sort of told me in confidence, so I don't want to say, but another podcaster who's doing very well in the category they're in, but they said that they didn't see any change when they got featured. And so I don't know whether it's just the time of the year or enough people had found it, or there was another thing being promoted that was slightly, you know what I mean? You just don't know.
Genuinely don't know. I mean, we've had Do the Right Thing especially has been reviewed twice. Once in The Guardian, once in The Observer. I mean, it's been reviewed more than twice, but in The Guardian and its Sunday sister, The Observer, we had a very nice review in both, actually. But God knows if that drives any listeners our way. But it's an interesting one. I genuinely don't know, but I cling to those figures because they were given to me, and I go, oh well, that's good. It's nice to think that we're reaching that number of people. I don't know if that's true or not.
No, totally. And for me, like you said, creating a community online, I think is key, and I think that's why, for example, Patreon is really useful because they're sort of the core base of people that you want to keep in contact with. And then I have a Facebook group which you should join. I have a Facebook group where I'm constantly sharing. So, for example, when you were coming on the day before, I put a thing up that said, "What do you want to ask him?" And anyone who's in that group can ask anything they want to ask, so that it's not just me doing the questioning, but also because they might have something that I've not even thought of. And like you said, the more brains you get into the room, the better.
Yes, that's true. It's one of those things that slightly changed in my circumstances since I started doing them, which is that there are proper things I could be doing, like being permanently engage in the community, which is important, online doing things, but full-time job, and it's just tricky. Luckily, these podcasts seem to make a bit of noise, and that seems to keep us in people's sight even when we disappear for 18 months. So hopefully anyway. And
I was going to ask you, but you again might not know the answer to this, so that's perfectly fine. What value or what sway reviews, downloads, even the avatar image of podcasts have on the charts, but also in getting people sort of excited about them?
I should probably be more across this sort of thing, but I don't obsessively check this sort of thing, and I certainly don't change the avatar and then look at how it affects numbers. I think both avatars have changed over time. Oh, maybe Do the Right Thing hasn't. I can't remember. No, it has. Definitely has. But just with both of them, I've sort of been very, very lucky to have illustrators willing to work with us just because they're fans of the show, really. Flatshare, Slamdown, we had a sort of a thing where every episode we get the artwork from a different illustrator. And one of those I then asked to sort of help me out with Do the Right Thing. And so our avatars have changed for both recently, and I think they're both cleaner, more immediately recognisable images, both small and large, if you know what I mean. But I haven't seen what effect that has. I mean, I think that's just common sense in terms of making your brand stand out. What a phrase to say, but you know what I mean. That sort of thing. What were the other factors? Reviews
on iTunes or any other platform.
I genuinely don't know what effect they have on numbers. I think I haven't checked in a long time actually, but I think our reviews for both. I should stress I'm mostly talking about Do the Right Thing and Pappy, Flatshare, Slamdown because I run them, whereas Richard's ones I'm sort of asked to help out on the team. I suspect we're around sort of 4 stars-ish, so I think we've always had a fairly positive sort of number of stars. I suppose if I'm looking for a new podcast on iTunes, which doesn't happen that often, but I suppose a star rating would, if I hadn't already been told by someone, go and check out this podcast, I suppose a star rating might affect whether I choose to check it out. But again, that's an organic process, those reviews, and quite... I actually see iTunes reviews, if anything, and I don't think about this too hard, but I'm always, whether they're good or bad reviews, especially with Do the Right Thing, which didn't go out for 18 months, I was always very happy to see people bothering to go back there and say, where is this 1 star? Or I hate this, I'm glad it's gone, 1 star. Even that, knowing that people were still bothering to come and visit once in a while and was a good sign, I thought. Reviews, avatars, what else was on the list?
Reviews, avatars, download numbers. I presume, because the thing is, this is the thing. No one really knows the formula for iTunes charts, for example.
No.
But you and like obviously, if you get downloaded loads, it's probably going to have an impact. If you get reviewed loads, it's probably going to have an impact. But it's just interesting to know individually, podcast-wise. So if you have an audience of, if we just use that figure for now, the 40,000 mark, if you're getting that. Because obviously, also the speed of downloads probably makes a massive difference. So if you put out 1 episode in a day and it got 40,000 downloads, it might not be, for the rest of the week in the chart, but it would shoot straight up for some reason. And I just wondered where if you've been monitoring that, or whether you had any tips or hints for anyone who wants to start a podcast.
You won't be surprised to hear that I haven't been monitoring it. It's not really what I do. Anecdotally, it would appear to me that. Not the algorithm might treat shows that are regular, like weekly. The algorithm might favour them a little bit, and also new shows, because both Do the Right Thing and Pappy, Flatshare, Slamdown, when we first started them, got into the charts on iTunes, and ever since then they've just been bubbling under. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I don't know. I have no idea what the algorithm is, but I suspect. We got a number of people who maybe subscribed at that point, and then they're not then counted as new listeners when you do you know what I mean? And so, but somehow, I genuinely don't know. But and having said that, it's also the case that somebody will tweet me and say, "Hey, look what's in the iTunes chart," and it'll be completely random, and I'll be like, "Well, why on earth is that there now?" And it's sort of okay. I don't know. I'm not even sure if iTunes is. It's certainly important, but it's, SoundCloud seems to be shared as much now. In a way, I'll often see SoundCloud links as much as I will iTunes links.
You use SoundCloud quite a lot for all the podcasts, and I use Podbean. I wondered if there was a reason for because
I'm very lucky that it is hosted by the British Comedy Guide, because I basically send them an MP3, the artwork, and the blurb, and some tags. And then they put it all together for me, because they have so many podcasts hosted on their thing. I think they're all on SoundCloud, and they have a sort of rhythm to it. So I'm afraid when it comes to that, I've always been very grateful that I haven't really been involved in the actual technical publishing of the podcast to SoundCloud, or they're hosting me on the site. I feel lucky in that way. I've just had to concentrate on making the show, if you know what I mean.
I can imagine that's quite nice.
Yeah.
Okay, and like we said, most people do podcasts just like you said for the fun of it and for anything that comes out of the other end of it. What's the best thing that's come out of your podcasting experience that obviously isn't like a financial thing, it's like just an opportunity maybe, or...
Oh, well, I mean, it's, as I said earlier, it's genuinely great to feel that, this is, again, a naff comment, but it's true, genuinely great to feel that there are people out there who really love the show. That is just, even if just one tweet saying this is great, or one message on Facebook saying really enjoyed that, it's great to know that you're making something people like. I really enjoy, we get some great guests on, and I like meeting them. The plan was always, hey, I'll do these shows, we'll get the guests on, I'll get to meet them, have a chat to them. But actually, no, at the recordings, especially since we now record Do the Right Thing and Pappy, Flatshare, Slamdown, we tend to record them together on the same night. So we do these monster gigs. So I'm basically running around like an idiot. So the only people I'll ever get to speak to at any length are the people who've stuck around at the end for a drink. But we've had some great comedian guests on the shows, and Richard Herring shows as well. We've had some amazing people on Leicester. The expert guests I really enjoy meeting, because I'm usually the one who has these big long conversations on the phone with the expert guest, trying to explain what the round is and Do the Right Thing, and trying to say, look, so I need to work out 2 scenarios perhaps based on things that have happened to you or might happen in your line of work, and you'll be there. We did a recording the other day where we had a butler on who was lovely guy, and I think a butler was a really interesting area for the panel. They could really get their teeth into. But trying to work out scenarios with him was very tricky because, of course, one of the key tenets of being a butler is having total discretion. And so he wasn't about to sort of tell me, disasters that had happened while he was in the employ of X or Y. I mean, we made it work, but they can be quite... Actually, the expert, God bless Twitter. I'll essentially approach strangers via Twitter and say, "Hi, could I DM you and ask you a thing?" And then we'll get in, have a bit of a DM chat, bit of an email chat, then turn into a phone call where I'll, reassure them I'm not insane and chat to them and sort of gauge how I think they're going to be on the mic. So the phone call is important, but then we're chatting about the and inevitably that first phone call I'll explain what I need in terms of scenarios, and the phone line will go quiet, and we'll both agree to go away and have a think and get back in touch, and we'll have another long phone call. But that's hard work, but it's good fun, and they're interesting people, and great, and it's fantastic when you have someone who isn't a comedian, but who is very interesting, good at talking, happy to be on mic, and then that round really zings, I think, sometimes. I really like it in that round where the comedians might disagree, but I genuinely like it in that round where the expert is so interesting that the panel, actually listen to them for a bit. It's good. I mean, there's never a joke far away, but but I really enjoy that. But beyond that, don't know. The joy is in the making of them, really. It's wrong to say I'm frustrated I can't get them out more quickly. It's just life, but they're great fun to do. Pappy's won a loaded LAFTA award. I'm not sure if that's something to be proud of or ashamed of.
I was going to ask about the awards because I got told, I think the Sony Awards, aren't they? They're audience vote or something, or are they?
Loaded LAFTA award was an audience vote. Chortle Awards, I think, are an audience vote. So we've been nominated for a few of them. Herring has won a few of them now. The Sony Awards, no, that's a panel of judges. But we got Do the Right Thing won a bronze award for best internet show, which is no mean feat for an indie podcast. And Leicester won a bronze award. But those awards sadly are discontinued now, which is a shame. But
Yeah, no, I mean, because
I'm going to say it's a shame. Actually, you sort of felt a sense of duty to enter it for an award, and you'd cough up some money to enter it, and you'd sort of think, I mean, I don't know. You sort of do them out of a sense of duty, and you sort of enjoy it slightly, but it's slightly weird as well. I mean, we're certainly not making the shows to win awards. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's odd. I mean, I think the Chortle one still exists.
Chortle Awards still exist. Yeah.
But for me, the interesting part is, like you said, I wouldn't make something for an award, and I think if you're making something for an award, you're not making it for the right reason necessarily.
Yeah, of course.
And I mean that's the same with everything. So if I made a show and I was doing it for a specific award, it's like, what you do. And if you can make something for an award like that, it's too formulaic for an award. It has to be more subjective than that, especially for something.
I think also it's a pathway to madness. How on earth do you second guess what an award wants in a way?
Yeah.
The closest I came was the Leicester that got nominated, that won a bronze. We did, for that one, make a sort of a highlights of 6 or 7 clips from a load of interviews to put together to sort of show that. So that was some work we put into that. But it wasn't so much about what will they want in the awards. It was about showing the number of people we've had on is an important part of this submission, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how the awards work. I assume you just put your name forward and then they pick 5 of the best ones they think, and then you go to audience vote.
They're all different. Sony Radio Awards, or the Radio Academy Awards as they became, which no longer exist, you had to pay an entry fee and choose to put yourself forward for. Chortle Awards nominations come out of the blue. Loaded LAFTA, I think nominations come out of the blue. God, that was a long time ago.
It's all really weird. It's all
it is strange, and I'm not. I think there are other awards and things we could enter, but I don't tend to bother with that.
No, that's fair enough. I was going to ask if it makes a difference to your download numbers or if it makes a difference to your thing, but
surely
I'm not going to.
Surely we've been speaking long enough now for you to realise I have no idea.
I've learnt my lesson on that one.
No, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, I'll tell you what. I've got 2 more questions to go, and then we can wrap up.
Sure.
So we were saying beforehand, you were commenting on the fact that I use a Zoom H4n as my recording equipment, and a lot of people, I think, are put off by starting a podcast because they think, they look at something like maybe Rehelistapa, or Do the Right Thing, and they think, it's got a producer, it's affiliated with British Comedy Guide, it's got, loads of, big guests coming on, and they sort of get put off by the fact that it looks like it's got so much more production value than, not that it doesn't have production value, but it's not, like you said, the 11 grand BBC 4 show or whatever.
Yeah.
What advice would you give someone who maybe wants to start a podcast but is probably looking at it from a wrong perspective because they're not thinking of it as a DIY project, they're thinking of it as a radio show?
Oh, maybe. Yes, I see. Well, yes. Well, I mean, the tech side, the Zoom H4n, I'm sure there are probably others out there now. I got mine a few years ago, but it is a portable recorder where, we're both talking into a microphone. If you chose to, you could easily record 4 tracks and get the ambient sound as well. It's pretty cheap.
I did that for the live show.
Yeah, because you get the audience on that. I forget how much I paid for mine, but they're compared to like a Tascam or something like that, they're pretty cheap, like a couple £100 max, probably less now, right?
I think mine was 170, 180. Yeah.
But they're great. Yeah. They really are good, and they're so, they look sort of plasticky and stuff, but they're, in my experience, hard wearing. I've never had a problem with it. You can do it with batteries. You can have a power pack. They're just really adaptable and flexible. And so that's great for any podcast where there's just 2 of you talking. You don't even necessarily, depending on the room you're in, you don't even necessarily need to have 2 mics together. Just experiment with acoustics until you're happy with it. But, a couple of mics, that helps as well. If you're doing it in front of an audience with the Zoom, 2 of you, there's 2 additional mics on the machine that you can record as 2 extra tracks, so you can get some audience sound. It's just so user-friendly. So that's a great bit of kit. For my panel shows, that's the device I record onto. It is more complicated for my panel shows. Everyone on the panel has a mic. I have separate mics up for the audience. They all feed into my mixing desk. On my mixing desk, I'm able to play out everything but the audience recording to the PA, house PA, and then I'm able to record that same mix for the PA plus the audience sound onto my Zoom H4n. So it's a bit more of an... I basically wheel this heavy suitcase to all my podcast gigs, which has all the kit I need in it. But even that, that is more complex, but it's not like it's some sort of amazing digital recorder or anything like that. It's the Zoom H4n is great. What I would say, but you may disagree, is I would say it's definitely worth editing what you record or listening back to it, certainly, before you put it out. I think, although I think Richard's great at what he does, I think it's Richard Richard Herring, I think he's got an audience who know what he does and they buy into that and all that sort of thing. I genuinely think you can really improve a show in post just by, pruning out the bits that are less... I expect by the time people get to this bit of this podcast, the podcast will only be 3 minutes long because you'll have cut all the waffle. But no, I'm
sure this one's going out.
Yeah, fine. but genuinely, I think factor in the idea of giving it a listen and an edit.
Oh yeah.
And there's loads of I use a thing called Pro Tools, which is a pro audio thing, but there's loads of freeware editing stuff out there. So it doesn't have to be. You don't have to sort of nip out every and It's just in terms of the content, just give it a good listen and and make sure it's tip top. But that's fairly obvious, isn't it? I
tend to listen to it through, write down the timestamps of when I think I need to edit stuff out, and then go through and edit that out, and then listen to it one more time to then do the show notes or whatever, or send it over to the guest and let them have a listen to it before I do the show notes, because otherwise I've got to do the show notes twice, and that's just a pain in the arse.
Yes, understood. So it's and in terms of the model of my shows is they are recorded live in front of an audience, and we do get guests on. And that's just the model for them. But, I think if you put them out, you don't, they're then there. Until you take them down, they're there for all to find, and it's, the art of getting them noticed online is a dark art I don't understand. So anyone has the potential to sort of reach out to people online if they, do you know what I mean? So I wouldn't be, I personally would always be content-led. If you have a great idea, then, the recorder and bits and bobs shouldn't be who am I to say what money people can spend? But it's pretty easy to get a good recorder for not too much money.
Yeah, the cost of kit has really come down, and you can sort of, like I said, this was not the most expensive recorder out there. I mean, the mics were pretty expensive because they're like the Rode, thingamajigs.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, a few £100, you could probably get quite a good setup. I'm always telling people to start, just if you want to start, just start. Even if you record it on your phone for the first episode, just a little pilot episode.
I think Collings and Herring, I think they used to just record that directly into their laptop through the laptop's built-in mic, I think. I think definitely get the content down. Yeah. I mean, look, I can get more tech geek about it and say, when you edit it, try and fiddle around with whatever compressor there is in your thing and just try and compress it down a bit. And that's sounds like a scary thing, but it's really just get it open, have a fiddle with it really, and find, it's just something which can add, I think, it's that thing of being able to hear on the bus. That's what a compressor helps you with. It just squeezes all the dynamic range of the sound from the quietest sounds to the loudest shouts, squeezes them all much closer to one another, so that you're not finding yourself wincing when someone shouts or having to listen extra especially hard with your fingers pushing the headphones into your ears for the quiet bits.
But that's all available online. Like for me,
I
googled it. I was like, Adobe Audition, how to, because someone said to me, they sent me a message, an email that just said, do you know about this, method of doing it? They weren't patronising or anything like that. They were just like, I just don't think you're doing it at the moment. If you are, here's another, tutorial for how you can do it better. And it's, like you said, all the content's out there for free anyway, so why not make it better?
But don't let any of that be a stumbling block to just getting stuff out there, because you'll work out how to make it sound better as you go, and I don't know why I went up at the end of that sentence, but I did.
Just to make my edit hard?
Yeah. And if it comes to it, you can always eventually remove the episodes which didn't sound so great or something like that. But the content's king, I think. Just make sure you've got a good idea, and I think an edit's an important part of the process. Even if the edit is just listening back through it, I think it's an important part of the process.
My day job, I write tweets for a living, so I write joke tweets for different brands.
Oh yeah.
And the two things that anyone who's get into any social media stuff that I always say is, like you said, content is king, but also the currency online is attention. And if you don't respect people's attention, it's not gonna go anywhere, because you're just, people can switch off too easily.
I think that's true, and I think my plan to put a full episode of Do the Right Thing on YouTube may get blown up in my face. But yeah, no, I know you. No, you're absolutely right. You have to be mindful of what people are how people consume this stuff. Definitely. Yeah,
totally. Do you read any books on podcasting or editing or stuff that you could recommend? Or obviously there's loads of stuff out there for free, but if there's any...
No, I didn't. I was sort of... I mean, my background way back is I did a music degree, then I did a master's in audio production, so I sort of learnt it all as I did it. Right. But what I would say is most editing software is probably fairly easy for me to say this, but I think it's true. It's fairly intuitive, really. Like, I don't know, if you've ever played around with any video editors, you'll find a lot of that pretty transferable to an audio editor, really. The logic's fairly straightforward. And I think just persevere with it. And, I mean, I think for podcasting anyway, so I use a thing called Pro Tools, which can do, it's there for like pro band recordings and things. All I ever really do is, arrange my audio in the timeline. I'll occasionally have a few different tracks for a particular edit and stuff, and I just run it through a bit of EQ, which is there to sort of filter out low rumbly noises, and whatever room I'm in, there might be a particular frequency that's grating, and EQ is a very, very simple tool to get to use, actually, EQ. That's very intuitive and easy to fiddle with. I literally run it through that, then I run it through a compressor, which we just talked about, and that's it. I don't add any other effects. I'm not sort of, so... Okay, it's still a process there, but it's something you can get into quite quickly, I think.
Yeah, totally. And I have an indie guide. Anyone listening to this, I have an indie guide for starting a podcast, which you can find on my website at simoncaine.co.uk. And you can find links to all the stuff that Ben just mentioned at simoncaine.co.uk/ATI/Ben Walker. And last question. Just a quick plug, why not? Just a very last quick question. What mistakes have you made along the way that you have learnt from that you would say to someone who wants to start a podcast, or maybe who already has a podcast that maybe they could learn from? Because obviously I find the more you do it, the more you learn from these things, but also the bigger the audience you have, the more you kind of have this pressure to learn as you go, because there's more people listening to it, so you're more worried that it's going to go wrong. So yeah, what tips and advice would you give a couple of thousand comedians that are going to listen to this?
Probably quite specific, and I'll probably sound quite smug, which is that all the podcasts I've been involved with have evolved pretty organically, and there's been no massive awkward turns along the way, if you know what I mean. I think we've simplified both of the panel shows slightly over time. We've cut out bits that we didn't need to do anymore, but I think that's just a natural process. It's not a, I don't know. There are bits of Flatshare Slamdown which we don't do anymore because we did them and they were fun. Then we realised actually they get in the way of the fun of talking to the guests and things like that. So we did away with them. I think I'd be very wary of recording a podcast at a music festival ever again. I think that was. I'm not sure if that's a lesson learned or not. Certainly recording in front of an audience. If you're doing different venues, try and make sure that your setup is either incredibly adaptable or that you've got some control over what's in the venue and things like that, or you recce the venue and things like that, because there's been a few gigs we've done where I have a fairly, as discussed, involved setup for the panel shows, and actually, you can get to a venue and your heart can sink a little bit because you're not going to be able to get mics directly on the audience, or do you know what I mean? And the music festival one was partly because we recorded the show at 1 a.m. at a music festival, so you can imagine what state everyone was in. But also because acoustically,
was it in a tent?
It was in a massive tent, and so the you can hardly really hear the audience in the podcast. And it feels a bit weak to sort of say the audience were enjoying it. Honest, I mean they were. I mean they're off their faces. No, the audience were enjoying it.
It could have been anything.
But it was. But they're not. You don't necessarily get a huge sense of that with the mics, and I like that feeling of. I think you feel you're more in the audience if you're hearing the audience there slightly. I can't think of any other. We've been incredibly lucky with the guests we've had. They've always seemed to have enjoyed it, and they've always been very giving with their time. So that's fantastic. That's not a thing I regret. No. Damn it. I can't think of much else.
It could just be general tips that you would have for anyone that... Because, I've got loads of friends that sort of say, I've got this really great idea for a podcast, but I think it would be take up too much time, or it would be, too much work, or it's too much money to start, or, there's loads of these excuses that everyone comes up. I probably did it for about a month before I started this one.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm getting to the point now where I'm looking to delegate more with the podcasts I make, because I think that would just ease the workload for me and also speed up the podcasts going out. But again, that's something you sort of probably reach. But if there are people who you can buddy up with who can share some of the burden, then that's... Well, burden's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Share some of the work. That would be good. It's... any other tips? Don't let the recorder's pretty simple to get hold of, right? It's not too expensive. If you can get hold of that, or if you can borrow one, or if you want to do a live one, some comedy venues now have the means, I think, to record within them. I don't know which ones they are, but I am told this is the case. Just go and try it out. If you're not happy with the result, don't put it out. There's no reason not to be going out and trying it. And I don't know if there's loads of comedy podcasts out there or loads of podcasts full stop out there, because it's the means of production are in the hands of the people. But that's no reason not to add yours to the mix. Sorry, I don't have any more specific tips. I think I came into it from quite a sort of weird position in terms of having been working in radio
Yeah.
for so long and stuff like that, and sort of my first taste of it being Richard's
Mhm.
one. But yeah, surround yourself by good people.
Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Well, no, it's been a pleasure.
That was Ben. I really enjoyed that. I've just listened to it again, and I think it's just such an interesting... He's so interesting, and I just find the path that he's gone and his ethos of doing something because he was interested with the people he was working with and the project itself, and I just think that's just a great way to go into any project. It really says a lot about podcasting, and it really says a lot about the energy and the communities around podcasts, that they're just people that want to make good stuff. I'm like that. I just want to make good stuff, and so it was really nice to meet another person who is into that. It was great. If you enjoyed this show and you got any value out of it whatsoever, please consider becoming a patron. You can become a patron from $1 an episode, 80p. It's really not that expensive. It would be great if you could do that as we got into in the podcast. It really helps out with budgeting and future shows and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to repeat it. If you've got this far, I'm assuming you've listened to what was in the episode about that. If you can't afford to become a patron, a one-off donation would be great. This is episode 35. It's about 52 hours worth of content in total has come out now. And obviously I've got new guests signed up. It would be really useful if you could support it in some way. If you can't do that, just share this with someone who you think would enjoy it. Honestly, that is also useful and helps out the show and helps out the community and helps build more audience for the show. In relation to this episode, I just want to let you know other guests that we have got coming on. I've spoken to Richard Herring, who is keen to come on, but not until next year. I've spoken to Stuart Goldsmith, who runs the Comedian's Comedian podcast, and he's very excited to come on. I am talking to Helen Zaltzman, who runs the Answer Me This podcast that we talked about in this episode, and she's going to come on, and we're going to have great discussions about building great audiences around great content and what you can get out of it, and why, as Ben said, you would put so much time and effort into something that ultimately might get you no money in return, and what you get in return. As a comedian who has done their fair share of unpaid gigs, I can tell you now that just because something doesn't pay immediately, it doesn't mean you don't get something out of it. If you're considering starting a podcast, do it. So thank you very much for sharing. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for donating. I will see you next time. Bye.